Many of you would have seen our high mileage E92 M3 project, and we thought, is it a good idea to do one on the F80 M3 and M4? Could be this one behind us. As part of this video, we're going to do a buyer's guide to give you an idea of what to look out for when you're looking for one of these cars. So this car is 125,000 miles, and I'm not going to say it's the highest mileage one available because you guys will crucify us and find one that's higher, but it was the highest mileage one at the time of looking. So I'm going to go quickly around the car and just have a look at what I would potentially be looking for when I would be looking to buy a car. Now, the first thing you'd want to do is a HPI check to make sure that it hasn't had any accidents or got any outstanding finance. If it's got outstanding finance, that's not a problem. You can just pay the person off so they can clear that before you take the car. But let's take a quick look around the car. This one is actually a very high spec. I will talk over the spec of it in a short while, but let's have a look at the general condition of the car. It's a really good idea to have a look at panel gaps. And already I can see there's one here. So that probably means that the bumper's been repaired at some point. Not a bad thing on these cars, but it needs some kind of adjusting. Normally, when a car's done this much mileage, it would have had loads of stone chips. So maybe at some point, someone's put some paint on the front end. If I look down the side of the car, the panels actually look really straight. I can't even see any dings in the door. So this car's actually been looked after pretty well. I'm assuming it's done lots of motorway miles, and I can't see any kind of panel gaps here. Front, straight away, I can see some budget tires. So they are a brand I've never heard of, Trocomo or something. So those would have to be changed to a more recognized brand because I'm sure they don't drive that great. Already I can see this car's got 360 cam, so that's an indication of the high spec that it does have. The carbon roof is actually in pretty good condition. It's got a few stone chips, which is not too bad for this amount of mileage, but I can't see any lack appeal. So the carbon roof is actually also in good condition, as is the rest of the paintwork for a car with this much mileage. It's got Pilot Sport 5 tires on the rear, so that's a good brand. You can also see the brake pads through there. They're okay for now, but they probably need to change at some point in the future. It also has this not very well fitting rear spoiler on the back and some fake M Performance tailpipes. So if I was to keep this car, I wouldn't be keeping these on there. But in general, the car looks in pretty good condition. The paintwork is not too shabby for this age, but it definitely needs a good detail. Got Michelin Pilot Sport 5s on this side as well. So at least they've matched the tires on the axles, and it's got the more important, better tire on the rear. Again, the interior is actually very clean for a car with this much mileage. There is wear on the bolster, but I've seen worse than that on cars with a lot less mileage. As I mentioned, this car does have a very high spec. It has individual Silverstone leather, including full leather, so on the dash and on the door cards. It also has CarPlay, lane assist, and a heated steering wheel, along with a rear blind with 360 cameras. So this, I think it's got every option ticked apart from the ceramic brakes. Stepping into the car, you really want to look for damage on the trim, especially around the door handles, because any of these pieces of trim, if they're scratched, they're going to be quite expensive to repair. Obviously, this car is 125,000 miles, so there is going to be wear in certain places. One of the key indicators of mileage, because a lot of these cars get clocked, is the steering wheel. So if your steering wheel looks like this and it's got half the mileage, I'd be asking some questions, because this has definitely seen a lot of wear. Modern BMWs don't come with the service book, so you have to check the iDrive to check the service history. So this is telling me it's got no service requirements. Everything is okay from brake pads to brake fluid, engine oil, and the vehicle check. So if I go into the service history, it's got everything in there, from the all-important running-in service all the way up to the last service, which was at 119,000. Interestingly, you can go into each one of these and see what's been carried out. And as we've been doing that, we have noticed that the last time the spark plugs were changed was 60,000 miles ago. So that's either they haven't been changed since then, or they've been changed and it hasn't been registered on the system. But as a BMW M specialist, we'd be changing the spark plugs a lot more frequently than that. Under the bonnet, it's important to have a look to make sure there's no kind of fluid leaks or oil leaks from any of these areas here. The oil thermostat does corrode like that, so that's actually normal for these cars. I've seen much worse with less mileage, so there's not much you can do about that apart from upgrading it. Apart from that, it looks pretty clean, so it's definitely been prepped at some point. You want to start the engine from cold, make sure there's no harsh noises. We did mention that we thought the bumper might have had a little knock, so it's important to check these areas here to make sure there's no obvious signs of crash damage. But let's get the car on the road, because that's going to give us more of an indication of how it's driving and if there's anything particularly wrong with the drivetrain. This car is one of the highest mileage ones I've driven at 125,000. That mileage is actually genuine. A lot of these cars, unfortunately, have been clocked or have mileage blockers on them, so you never know the real mileage on them unless you've got a piece of equipment to check, which we did on this one. Yeah, I can tell immediately the suspension is very loose on this. It's got steering is not precise in the slightest. The engine feels pretty decent, but yeah, this is a bit like the high mileage E92 we bought, that just felt really loose. I mean, to do 125,000 miles, it's gonna be a lot of motorway mileage, but I just don't think the OEM bushing and suspension parts are designed to last that long, which they shouldn't be really. They are maintenance part. You drive it normally, it kind of rides okay, it's fairly comfortable. In terms of acceleration, it feels, I guess, normal. My mind is a bit warped because I've just been driving our 1,000 horsepower G82. But I mean, this is not a bad example. I don't know what that vibration was. To be fair, it's got full leather, so it's got the leather on the dash. The interior is actually pretty clean for a car that's done so much mileage. It's got the standard F80 creaks from the door panels and midsection. But to be fair, our car F80 only had 11,000 miles on it, and it still had similar noises. See if I can drive it a little bit more keenly to feel what the back end is doing, because that was always a big problem on the E92 platform. On this one, yeah, it's just the front is not giving me any kind of confidence whatsoever in terms of, I'm steering, but I don't really know what the car is doing. There's a tiny bit of movement, not as much as I felt on the high mileage E92 M3. But yeah, so whereas on the E92 M3 it just literally felt disconnected front to back. This one, the front doesn't have much feeling at all, but the rear seems to be okay. But this is the point where I go, oh, let's go back to the workshop and let Aston have a look, and he points out everything that's wrong with it. But it doesn't feel to me like the dampers are not operating how they should be. Well, maybe, especially on the way it rides, but when you go into a corner, load it up, it's not inspiring any confidence whatsoever. So it's going to be a case of having a look underneath and seeing what potentially needs replacing on a car with this kind of mileage. And the good news is Matt, our camera guy, has actually bought this car, so you're going to be seeing a lot more of it on the channel. We're going to do a project series, so you buy a high mileage F80 M3 or F82 M4, what do you need to look out for, what do you need to do to get it driving to its best. So I'm looking forward to running this series because it was very interesting and informative on the high mileage E92 M3 project. So after my drive of the car is something I would have definitely bought. Matt has already bought it. And we do offer a pre, or in this case, a post-sale inspection. So I'm going to hand over to Aston. We're going to go through the car and he's going to tell me what's wrong with it or if it's actually a good buy. So Aston, what would be the process for this?
So basically when we get the car in, we put it onto the ramp like we have. We'll start by checking over the engine bay, make sure there's nothing leaking, there's nothing obviously broken or worn, any boost pipes leaking, if it's a turbo, any coolant pipes leaking and stuff like that, just anything visually that's damaged underneath the bonnet. We do the same underneath the car, and kind of on the side of the car we'll be checking tyres, brakes, suspension, exhaust, any components underneath, arms, bushes, basically everything that moves and is holding a important part of the car together. We'll check that over and make sure nothing's broken or
Okay, cool. I mean, in an ideal world, before buying a car, you'd like to do one of these inspections beforehand, but sometimes it's not always possible. But I will try and get the car on a ramp, but I know that's not always possible.
Yeah. So obviously it's very easy to clean the engine bay up and make it look really pretty when you go to look at a car. You can't see what the car looks like underneath, so that's why we offer the service of looking underneath the car and checking it over. So yeah, the other thing we do when we're doing these is we plug diagnostics in and see if there's any hidden codes in the ECUs as well, and check kind of values and things like that, make sure it's all running okay.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, we'll basically run over the engine bay now, we'll get it up in the air, check everything underneath, and then we'll go around the wheels, suspension, tyres, and then we'll check the diagnostics.
Okay.
So Imran has left us and we have mic'd Matt up behind the camera. Now we can continue with the inspection. Now Matt did buy this car from a company called We Sell Any Car, and as the name states, they do sell any car. So although they would have done a thorough check of the car when they purchased it, they would not have the knowledge and the experience of these cars as a specialist would, which is where we come into play, and I can look over the car properly for Matt.
Okay, so have I actually bought a good car? I kind of think so, Imran kind of thinks so, but I've actually done 2,000 miles in this and we haven't put it on the lift yet, so
it'll be interesting to find out what we've got. So as we said, we'll start with the engine bay, have a look through, check all of the pipes, check all the wiring, leaks, gaskets, all that sort of stuff, and then we can go underneath and we can take a better look at what else you've got. So if we start off, we'll take off the engine cover just to give us a bit more room to see.
Yeah, it's quite a busy engine bay.
Yeah, unfortunately now with newer cars, engine bays are all very compact, and there's lots of plastic covers and sound deadening and all sorts of things that just kind of hide any possible troubles underneath. It doesn't give a lot more to see, but it gives us a bit more room to play. So we have a look, like around the front of the engine, you've got the majority of your coolant pipes. They will run into the block and then they're running around into the radiator. Obviously this is your main intake here, one here and one here. And then you've got kind of gaskets between each point that seals. So your oil filter housing here, there's a gasket in between. You've got your inlet manifold here, there's a gasket in between. Cam cover or rocker cover, however you want to name it, on the top. And then various components that are just kind of bolted to the engine itself.
Yeah, so one thing you're going to have over me looking is where you work on cars, you know what to look for to see evidence of the car being worked on as well.
Yeah, so things like, say for instance, you've got here clips that's holding in the wire in, things like this. Sometimes when people take engine bays apart, they don't clip them all back in properly, they don't run wires back into their right channels. If they've changed, for instance, you had a leak on your oil filter, your oil filter housing gasket, they might change the gasket over but not clean all of the oil and the extra residue from the outside. This is generally looking pretty clean all over. So if it has had any work done, they've been pretty careful and pretty meticulous with putting it back together. It's all looking as it should do from factory.
Yeah, because obviously you can't say that it hasn't been worked on, but perhaps it's been worked on by someone like us who makes sure to put everything back in the right place and clean up and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, being kind of its age and mileage now, it's probably safe to say it has been worked on, at least being serviced, which obviously takes into account taking off this cover, taking the pipes out, changing the spark plugs. One thing that normally breaks on these if people aren't careful is these little tabs on the side. I don't know how well you can see them. You've got just one tucked down there.
Yeah.
And then you've got another one just behind. Now, because these obviously have to be taken off to get to the spark plug, some people just yank them and they break, which they haven't. So whoever has been working on this car has probably taken quite a lot of care and paid attention when they're doing so, which is great. It's comforting because you know it's been looked after. I mean, while you're in the engine bay, things to check like coolant levels. Obviously on an older car you can check oil level with a dipstick. These newer ones don't have them. When you're checking coolant levels, make sure the engine is cold, otherwise you get a face full of coolant. That's not nice. Been there and done that. That level there is looking okay. It's a little bit below the maximum, but not kind of too low that we'd be concerned.
Yeah, and why is it a good idea to check on these engines the charge cooler?
So as you say, charge cooler, that's what this one is. So this coolant runs purely in the charge cooling system into the turbos. Now, if these charge coolers fail internally and they crack or break or leak inside, obviously the coolant then runs inside and it runs into your intake system and into your turbos and into the engine. So that's one thing to check when you're buying an S55 engine, is the coolant levels of the charge cooler. Sometimes they're just low a little bit where they get hot and they burn. But if it's excessively low, like almost empty,
it's a good indication, because we know the charge cooler is a not super common, but we have had to change them in the past.
It's happened before, yeah.
Where they split inside and leak.
And then obviously you've got the main engine coolant, which is in this one. Again, it's a little bit low, but it's not kind of excessively low. It's not empty and it's not dry, and obviously these cars now would tell you if you had very low coolant anyway. So that's kind of a good indication that you've not got any leaks or any heavy leaks on any of your cooling system.
Yeah, and again, kind of generally in the engine bay, indication of it being worked on, especially with all the covers and everything. We kind of know what we're looking for, and it can give you a bit of an idea if you don't have proof of any work that's been done, or if there's been issues before. Yeah,
that's it. If you don't have receipts or any history to do with the car, you can kind of give it a visual inspection and know, like for instance, if this part here was shiny silver, you'd know that this had been replaced.
Yeah.
You'd know it had a new oil cooler or thermostat housing put on it. But yeah, I mean, visually, it's looking pretty good. There's no leaks, there's no coolant, there's no oil, there's no puddles, there's no splits. There's no brakes.
Yeah, we'll get a bit more of an idea. Obviously, this is all kind of roughly something you could do, again, when purchasing the car, just on your own. Perhaps the owner wouldn't want you to take the engine cover off, but just a good detailed look you can definitely do. But one thing we can do now is put it up on the lift and look from underneath, take the under trays off, and that gives you a lot more visibility to the engine as well.
Yeah, because the thing is as well, if you have got a leak, again, like I said, there's lots of components here covering up the engine bay. So if you do have a leak, obviously gravity causes the leak to go downwards. You might not be able to see from here where the leak has come from, but if it has leaked, then it's going to be underneath, sat in the under trays.
Yeah. I think the next thing, probably with the engine bay, is just to then start it up and just have a little listen to it. So
start it up, listen for noises. Obviously, make sure you've put back all of the caps that you've taken off, and anything like that, and anything that's loose.
Well, they call it mayonnaise check, don't they?
Yeah, just make sure there's no head gasket issues. You can kind of partially visually inspect the chain through this hole. You can't see too much, but you can see a few bits and pieces just to make sure there's nothing obviously broken.
Yeah, if anything in there is obviously not looking right, that would be at first kind of like a alarm bell kind of thing.
But yeah, let's get the engine cover back on and we'll start her up. So the car obviously is on its cold start at the minute, so we'll let that quieten down and then we can get a good indication of how the car sounds when it's normally running. The other good thing with a cold start is that if it's very loud, it's obviously going to accelerate any noises. So if something is broken or bent or knocking, it's going to be a lot louder and a lot harder with the cold start on because the revs are slightly higher. So that's kind of a good thing to do if you hear the car when it's running from cold.
Yeah, and another thing is, we know with a lot of the tunes, people turn off the cold start.
Yeah.
So
you know whether the car's been
if you
tuned or
don't
not.
know if the car is tuned and it doesn't have a cold start, that means it's either not cold or it's been tuned.
Yeah, or it's been tuned. Yeah, so obviously the cold start has now calmed down and we can hear the engine a lot better. They are generally quite a noisy engine anyway. The injectors are quite loud and they do tend to be a little bit aggressive when idling. But generally, it doesn't sound like a loud engine for these. Obviously we've had many of these come through the door, anything ranging from kind of very, very low mileage to maybe 10, 20,000.
Well, we also own two brand new.
Yeah, we had two from new. And yeah, we've had many come in at kind of 100k, 80k, 110k. They all vary a lot, and they all generally sound pretty much the same. If you've got a knock coming from the engine or something obvious, it's very, very obvious. Like you can hear it running, you think it doesn't sound right. But again, it's something that we've kind of come accustomed to over the years.
Yeah, because when I went to view it, the high pitch like ticking noise was something I was a little worried about, but I think
generally how they are.
Sounds roughly like injectors. The other thing potential is wastegate rattle, isn't it?
Yeah, wastegate rattle, which is obviously quietened down a lot by having cats fitted to the car. If you've got downpipes fitted, they tend to be a bit louder. But again, it's not kind of excessively noisy. You would know if it was, because it sounds more like a diesel than a petrol. But one thing I did just notice as we were looking in here is this Jubilee clip isn't tightened up.
Oh yeah, it's loose.
So I'll get the Jubilee tool and I'll tighten that up there.
But that comes off when doing the air filter, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So you can take it off when you're doing the air filter.
Yeah, so it's just more than likely just been forgotten when doing an air filter change or that kind of thing.
Or they've maybe had an aftermarket intake system fitted, and then they've refitted the standard one and not remembered to tighten that back up.
It's not a major problem, but obviously you'd rather see it done up.
The good thing is with these pipes, because they're not under boost, as long as it's pushed inside, it's not going to leak and cause you any problems. So yeah, I'll tighten that up quickly. So while we've got it running, we'll put it up in the air as well, and then we can check underneath for any exhaust leaks or any problems like that. And if there was a leak of coolant or oil, especially coolant with it under pressure, the coolant's going to be pumping out while the engine's running. So we can check all of that stuff with the car on the lift, and then we can turn it off and have a visual inspection of everything else that's underneath. Yeah, so we'll have a look underneath. It doesn't look like the exhaust has been off for a while, if it has ever been off, because obviously the nuts and stuff are all old and corroded. So that's a good indication it may have been standard for quite a while or never been modified. It also doesn't look like it's been caught on anything, so
doesn't look
maybe
like
the car hasn't been lowered.
Yeah.
Or used on kind of rough surfaces or kind of dodgy terrains. Because they do sit quite low. The exhaust, as you can see with these, they hang quite low compared to the rest of the body. Yeah. So if it was lowered, it would catch things as they go over them. But I mean, being a one piece, you don't tend to get a leak on a seal or a join. But sometimes they get like holes in the welds and things like that, and they can leak on like these brackets. They can crack. The gaskets can leak between there, or you can lose connection here on a weld. But it all seems pretty solid.
Yeah, the other advantage of having a look underneath when it's running is obviously you can look underneath from the engine and just hear if there's any other kind of...
if there's any extra noises. And then we'll give a quick listen to the engine. Again, doesn't sound excessive. The gearbox sounds pretty quiet. And there doesn't seem to be any liquids dropping down or leaking anywhere. So I think we can say that's also good. Yeah. So your engine bay is good and the sound is good. No leaks on the cooler.
Okay, let's turn the engine
off. Now turn it off and visually check it. Yeah. So we'll start off with the car halfway up the ramp and we'll check over stuff like the tyres, the wheels, the brakes and the suspension. First thing I notice obviously is you've got Michelin Pilot Sport 5s on the back, and then you've got what looks like a budget tyre on the front. Although in good condition.
Yeah, the dealership did put these on, which is kind of fair enough.
Yeah, you can see they're new because they're stamped, they're date marked 23. So they're a new tyre. And they don't look like a bad tyre, but it's just mismatching tyres front to rear is not always a great.
Yeah, I do actually have another set of PS5s to go on the front.
Oh, so you're going to match the set?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good because things like that is more to do with the grip level of this tyre being different to that level, and some tyres different compounds take longer to warm up than others do.
Especially now we're in winter and things like that. But the PS5 on the back does kind of tell you a bit about the previous owner, and tyres are always a good way to tell how the car has been looked after.
Yeah, if they've cheaped out on the tyres, then they probably don't spend much money on looking after the car, especially when it comes to things like that, because these obviously keep you to the road.
Yeah, I understand a dealer not putting any expensive tyre on, but
because they're trying to make money on the car.
The rear's probably been put on start of this year, maybe.
I mean, the brakes look pretty good. You've not got any cracks in the disc on this side, and it's not very lipped. Pads are maybe sort of 50% worn, so you know you're going to be good for a while.
Yeah, because brakes being low on these can be not the cheapest thing to change.
It's worth taking that into consideration when you're buying a car. If like this, if the brakes are low, you're going to be in for a large lump of money to spend out when you first.
Yeah,
like
if you're doing full OEM
it.
parts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so if it's like a highly priced car, you'd kind of want to try and knock the price down a little bit to compensate for the expense you're going to have to spend out on the brakes.
Yeah.
But no, they look pretty good. The spring looks okay, it's not broken. The shock doesn't seem to be leaking.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm quite surprised with how well it seems to drive. Obviously, you've driven it as well.
Yeah, no, that was one thing I noticed for its mileage. It does handle and feel quite smooth and quite comfortable. So obviously I carried out the same check on all the other 3 corners, checking the brakes, the disc, the pads, the tyres, the springs. And the only thing I picked up is this boot is split, which again is common. They're such thin material and they're out to the elements, so they just end up wearing and breaking away.
The bump stop looks surprisingly good though, actually.
The bump stop's pretty clean and pretty solid. So again, it may have had new springs put on at some point or new bump stops. These springs are actually quite clean.
And they've got the label on, which I can't remember if ones from the factory do.
They usually do, I think. But the thing I pick up on this is that there's no rust on them, and the outer paint hasn't started to corrode away. So he's probably had new springs put on at some point. Obviously, we don't know for sure, but it's kind of again at 130k to be this clean is quite.
It's not like it's only been driven in fair weather to do that many miles in 5 years.
As you said, the rear tyres, they were put on the beginning of this year. They're date marked 2023 as well, but kind of earlier in the year. So yeah, the previous owner has spent good money on the car. So it wouldn't surprise me following by that. You could kind of assume that he would have gone OE if he did have to replace.
Yeah, and it's been serviced by
if they did have to replace.
BMW as well. Yeah. One thing I did notice was the alloys, just they're diamond cut. It's always going to hammer.
They always corrode away.
They're not too bad, but realistically, unless they've just been done, they're quite hard to keep in a nice, clean condition. It's not my favourite finish personally, so.
They don't look like they've been recut. This one doesn't. You can normally tell if the edges are really, really sharp and the face is really flush. But again, I'm not an alloy wheel expert, so I can't really.
Yeah, little things like spidering under the lacquer or some lacquer coming away is a bit unavoidable, really.
But yeah, I mean, none of the shocks are leaking. None of the springs are broken. All of the discs and pads are adequate, and the tyres are all good. It's just these front ones are a budget.
Yep. Okay.
Let's move underneath. Now we already know the exhaust is okay, and obviously all the under trays and stuff, although wet, none of them are broken or caught, so they're all right.
Yeah, it's quite nice to see non-damaged, non-hanging down under trays. I know these cars aren't quite as bad for it.
The
earlier ones?
ECT pan on the gearbox is very dry.
Oh, that's unusual actually.
It is very unusual. Normally you get like a leak because they're only a plastic tray. They tend to leak quite often. I mean, without taking this tray off entirely, we won't be able to see for sure, but I'll probably whip that off quickly and we'll just have a quick look. But on quick visual inspection, it is pretty dry. Now, one of the main issues these cars suffer from is obviously leaking turbos. Do you think your turbos are going to be leaking?
Well, as I said, I have driven it for 2,000 miles.
And how many litres of oil have you gone through?
I have had to top it up once.
With how much?
Just under a litre. So,
okay. So yeah, I mean, that's taking into account that it had full oil before you bought it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I checked on the day was it was full. So
yeah,
we shall see. I mean, we see them with a much lower mileage leaking. So
yeah, I've seen them at sort of 30-something K leaking, so it's not really 30-something thousand miles, that is, for those running kilometres.
That's all the things we're going to kind of slowly start to find out.
It is looking a bit damp, Matt.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Exterior on the turbos?
Yeah. You can see it here on the oil return pipe and just above.
I don't know. I
don't know how well you'll be able to get in there.
Might have to get that under tray off to show that. I'll try and put a shot in later on to show that.
Yeah, I can just about see it through this gap. but it is looking a bit damp. So yeah, you have got a bit of a leak. Doesn't look excessive, and it's not coating everything in oil.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably either a fairly recent one or it's not a very heavy one.
Yeah, because they can fail both to leak internally and externally.
Yeah.
So that you can see on an external, but an internal leak would tend to send the oil down the exhaust. And then if it was bad enough, I guess you'd see a bit of a bluey white smoke.
Yeah, they generally smoke quite a lot, but if it's severe, obviously because you've got cats and secondary cats and back boxes, it tends to like swallow a lot of it. Yeah. But you can notice from kind of heavy smoking, especially on like cold start.
Yeah. So on the high mileage E92 we did, which is obviously the precursor to this project.
Yeah.
It was all about suspension bushes.
Yeah.
But you didn't actually drive that car too much to begin with.
No, before we done the work, I didn't really drive it.
I did, and it was terrible, as Imran
much
said.
Better with the improvement.
But this doesn't seem as bad.
I mean, yeah, when I drove it, the only thing I could really pick up on was like the diff bushes, maybe.
Yeah, I've noticed that. But at the front.
But the front was pretty solid. On a very, very harsh bump, I hit one very harsh bump, and it had a little bit of a bang. Yeah. Which would maybe be the damper slightly weak, but they're not leaking.
Or potentially top mount. There's
top
just
mount.
A warm piece, but visually, what are you thinking here?
Visually, again, they all look okay. I mean, you've got, obviously none of these bushes are oil filled, and a lot of them on these now are like a swivel bush.
Yeah, spherical.
Rather than, spherical, that's what I was looking for, not swivel. Rather than rubber. But you can normally see if the rubber ones are worn. Which again, these aren't.
It doesn't have a great amount of steering feel. I don't know if that's going to be that front bush in there, potentially just worn. But then I do remember, even on the brand new one, Imran wasn't massively impressed by that. So,
but yeah, in terms of cracking and stuff, they all seem to be in pretty good condition.
Yeah, one thing I can now see is there is one under tray missing. Directly above your head.
Yeah, and the same the other side.
Yeah, and this is the side that's also had a bit of damage, so...
It also doesn't have the strip running across the front.
Yeah, so it has had some form of repair.
There isn't any screws in holding this under tray too.
Yeah. So possibly it's had a bumper off, an insurance repair or something.
Maybe been painted.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like the best quality paint, so yeah, it's probably had a bit of paint.
Yeah, or a smart repair or something, but...
We did also notice that the oil cooler was bent, which is fairly common on these cars because of the vulnerable position at the very bottom of the car. It didn't seem to be causing any issues with no leak, but it's something to look into in the future and how we can prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned diff bushes.
Yeah.
And that's probably my biggest must fix, I think, from what I can tell. Can you see that at all visually?
I mean, this bush here has got a slight crack in it. You can see it started to crack through.
Yeah.
See the line across it.
And this, I believe, is an earlier bush.
Which means it's got the oil in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably worth changing over that bush.
And typically when BMW have updated a bush, it's because it did fail.
Because it failed many, many times, yeah. I mean, it also looks like a slight bit of oil on the front, unless you've run something over, but this looks like a bit of oil weepage and build up.
Oh, yeah.
But then the actual seal higher up doesn't look too bad. It's a bit difficult to see really, but
yeah, it's got a big brace in the front.
It's probably got a bit of a leak coming from the front of the diff as well, and potentially the side at some point, because it looks like it's got a bit of an oil build up, but not damp. So it may have had it before and they fixed it and not cleaned it up, or it's just leaked very, very slowly and now it's stopped leaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely something I would look into doing. And then yeah, rear arms and stuff and bushes, they all look like they're in good condition as well.
Yeah, it all looks like it's got a fairly uniform layer of dirt, which generally means nothing's much been touched under here.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's been cleaned or anything like that either.
But yeah, overall, for its age and mileage, I don't think you've done too bad, Matt.
Yeah, I think the underside is looking actually pretty good.
All things considered.
I think time's going to tell start to fail and what we can find. But from a pre or post-purchase inspection, what is your final thoughts?
So yeah, I think generally...
More of a mechanical visual inspection at least.
Generally solid car. All the components and stuff are all in good condition. The brakes and tyres are all okay. Brakes are sort of 50% worn. No springs are broken. The only things that I picked up on was that this diff, a bit of oil weeping from the front. That front right-hand side, the rubber bush around the shock or damper has broken away. The front has definitely had some paint at some point, and then obviously that under tray is not secured and the two side ones are missing.
Yeah, and
it
looks like Hash has also found
the leaking turbos, which was the next thing I was about to say, is the turbos are leaking oil. Yeah. So yeah, as Hash knows, as we all do, these are very, very common for oil leaking, which is why he's gone straight under there and looked straight for that, because he loves changing the turbos on these cars. Yeah, so
I think that would be the main thing you'd mention to a customer would be leaking turbos, yeah.
Yeah, I mean the turbo leaking is obviously the more important thing.
Yeah.
They're quite expensive to replace, and if they fail entirely, they can cause other problems.
Yeah,
and
so
other
especially
damage.
on a pre-purchase inspection,
it's definitely worth bringing that into account when you're looking at how much you're going to spend on the car. It's no good paying premium price for a car that you're then going to end up spending thousands and thousands more on top to do brakes and turbos and stuff, when you can buy one for a similar price that's already got them things done.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, well done, Matt. You've actually done all right.
Well, now we can plug it in.
Now we can plug it in and see what it says. So we've finished up on the visual inspection, and the last thing we need to do now is plug it in with ISTA and read any fault codes that are either hidden or currently present.
So obviously when you're viewing a car, any warnings on the iDrive screen is a big obvious thing, which this doesn't have. But that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have any fault codes.
Of course, so obviously you get previous faults, and you can also sometimes get hidden faults. Obviously ISTA will run through every module within the car, including the ECU, and give us any faults that are either currently there or hidden or have been there previously. And the other thing that you can do with this kind of thing is you can run through the different equipment on the car, so it gives you like a list of what the car should have come with. So things like Harman cards and stuff like that, and different trim levels, it will run it all through in a list, so it gives you an idea of what that is, and then you can match that with the car so you know whether it's been tampered with.
Yeah, because this is BMW software that we have use of as a specialist.
It's just running through the test now. This will also tell you like production date of the car, tells you like the engine code, what car it is, it gives you the VIN, it gives you the mileage. That's another thing as well, if it's been clocked or it's got a stopper within the dash, the mileage will obviously be different on here to what it is on the actual car dash. That gives you a good indication that someone's messed around with it.
Yeah, because that's, talking of production date, that's something interesting on this car. I forget if we've already mentioned this. Even though it's a 2018, it was built January 2017.
Yeah, so
the reg should say it's a facelift car.
This is actually showing that the construction date was November 2016.
Yeah, so
yeah, built November 16.
But then not registered till what, March?
Yeah.
April?
So it's a bit of a while for it to sit there.
Yeah, which makes sense with it being such an individual car. It probably was ordered, then cancelled order, or
delay on parts maybe, and it's sat waiting for seats or a dash part or something like that. So the control unit tree has come up, and it shows obviously all of the boxes that are green are modules that are okay, and then all of the ones that are yellow have faults within them. Now, as we said, there isn't any on the dash, so we don't have an actual engine light or an indication of a problem on the car in itself, but as the modules are showing, we've got a lot of faults within each module, or each control unit, sorry. So like if we just hover over each one, so here you can see the group type, it says all-round vision camera, and it's showing that it has a fault in there. And then we've got up here ZGM, which is a central gateway module. You've got faults in there. FEM, electronics modules, faults in there. Then, I mean, the most important ones are here, which are your DME, which is obviously your engine ECU, which is green, that's okay. And then you've got DKG, which is your gearbox, which again is green, so there's nothing kind of serious in that. But you've got 12 faults altogether, so we'll display the faults and run through what they are. And a lot of them will probably say absent or...
Yeah, because I know, for example, those camera faults, the cameras do work. Yeah. So that could just be absent faults, or could be voltage related faults, that kind of thing. You get a lot of stored faults.
Yeah, they just kind of sit there. I mean, yeah, as you're going through it on here, it gives you the fault code on the left of what the fault is. Then it's got a brief description of the fault. It says the mileage of when the fault was, like when it was brought up, which obviously we know is in kilometers because that's way more than what's on the dash. And then it says existent, and then it says yes or no. Now, pretty much all of them say no, 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 unknown, which generally means, I mean, for that one, it says vehicle driven until tank completely drained of fuel. Matt's not been putting fuel in it.
That's probably me because I can't afford to fuel it.
Matt's not been putting fuel in it. And then it says unknown. So that translates to Matt's being cheap. Fault permanent.
But generally, all the faults it's displaying, most of them you're saying are absent, and then there's a few that none of them are overly worrying.
No, none of them are like overly worrying, and majority of the time they're like if it's had just a moment, like a loss of voltage from the battery for a moment if the battery's low, but everything works, so you know it's just kind of a ghost fault as such. If you delete everything out,
because all we can do is
and then you can
take
always
a record of it all.
you can always run a fresh read on it and see what comes back. And then we know which ones are kind of a permanent issue. And it's now showing fault memory 0. So anything that it was showing is obviously not a major issue because it would come up as it runs through the camber system. Once it's been driven, we'll probably reread the codes and see if anything comes back permanently. But at the minute, there is nothing there, so we know there's nothing serious.
Yeah, again, as part of a pre-purchase inspection, obviously, if there was anything particularly we were worried about, we would now take it for another test drive.
Yeah, and then we'd rerun the faults again.
Overall, there's nothing on the dash, and now there's not really anything coming up.
The modules either. So I think we can close the laptop down at that, and you're good to go.
So that's a clean bill of health.
Clean bill of health.
Other than turbos.
Apart from the turbos leaking.
And a few suspension bushes and stuff like that.
No issues.
Well, I hope you found this buyer's guide useful if you're looking for one to purchase. We've tried to share as much knowledge as we can, and it's that kind of knowledge that I used when purchasing this myself, because as we said, I hadn't actually put it up on a lift, brought it here, plugged it into any diagnostics, that kind of thing. I just did what I could do on a dealer forecourt kind of thing. So hopefully you can find some tips in here that you can use if you're looking for one yourself. As for this project, it is a high mileage car. It's one of the highest mileage ones we could find. And we're going to run it similar to how we did the high mileage E92 M3. And we're just going to go through, see what goes wrong with them over time. And then we can kind of advise people better when they bring their cars in, what might be going wrong, that kind of thing with them, and just gain more knowledge about the platform itself. We will also be modifying it once we've done a few things. As we've said, it does need some turbos. So, have to look into that. That's a future video for sure. And then we're going to modify it a bit. And I think, what would you want us to see us do? What parts are you thinking of? What kind of style are you thinking? It's not going to be kind of an all-out track car. And obviously we did the big power build with our F8 M3 Viper. So we're not going to go that way. We're going to keep it to more of an everyday kind of road car, more what someone who's now buying this kind of car is probably looking for, is something they can run every day. But that's the end of that video, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be along with more in the future.
And yet, as soon as filming was done, those awful fake carbon M performance tips had to go. Sorry if you like them, but they're just really not my style. I found a set of the original chrome exhaust tips really cheap, so I just put those on, and I think they'll do for now until we look at other exhaust options in the future.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you liked the video, please remember to smash that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. If you want to join the conversation, please drop a comment below and we'll try our best to respond to you. If you want to watch more of this project, you can do so over here. If you want to watch what YouTube thinks you might like from our other content, you can do so over here.